Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Citizen Kino, a show all about our favorite movies. I'm Max Heresy, joined by my brother Sam, and today we are talking the 2015 satirical black comedy, The Death of Stalin, directed by Armando Iannucci and starring an ensemble cast including Steve Buscemi, Jason Isaacs, and Simon Russell Beale. So Sam, just starting off, I think this is a very different movie from really anything we've talked about up to this point. You know, you've got your kind of bigger blockbusters in Dune and The Batman. You've got the older movies in, Branded to Kill, Tokyo Drifter. And then even, this is about the same time period as Whiplash, but these two movies feel very, very separate to me. So just, I guess, starting off with a bit of a plot summary. This basically just follows, as the title might suggest, following the death of Joseph Stalin, basically the power struggle that all of his cronies undertake to try and, secure that top spot. So it sounds serious. It's got a very serious subject matter, but it's a satire. It's a comedy. And I think it's hilarious. I think they balance that fine line very well because they're never really making fun of the tragedy. They're poking fun at the people behind the tragedy. And I think that's something that those people those portrayals would be so unflattering to those people. So I personally just love it. But I've seen this movie a few times. Just give me your general thoughts kind of coming into it for the first time. Did the comedy work for you? Just anything about this?
Yeah, so going into this movie, when you first told me we were going to watch this movie and review it on today's episode, I did not think it was a comedy just based off the title. And then I think you told me it was a comedy. So I kind of went in knowing what to expect, but I think the tone right off the bat kind of hits very well. And you kind of understand that they're portraying this time period, they're portraying the horrors kind of accurately, but playing on how ridiculous, all these people, the way that this thing functions. And I think I really enjoyed the comedy in this movie, mostly because I felt like the comedy was more organic in a sense, where I never felt like it was oh, here's the setup and then here's the punchline, now laugh at this joke. It was kind of woven into what was going on, and kind of the characters, I think, are really the source of the comedy, and just their sometimes ludicrous interactions with each other.
Yeah, and I think that comedy is, the scene is set very well with that opening scene. It's an orchestra performance, and upon its conclusion, the not the conductor, but kind of the producer in the back, he gets a call from Stalin saying that he wants a recording of the performance. So he goes out, he gets everybody back inside, he's freaking out, then he makes them do it all again, and it's a very, very comical scene, and that's the first thing you're introduced to.
Exactly, yeah. I love the way this movie starts, because right off the bat, it shows how these people view Stalin and how terrified they are of him, and that never stops for the time that he's alive in this movie. So it's always people are scared of him and scared of what he might do and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden, boom, he drops dead, and then it's well, what now? Yeah,
and I love just how they're in the room after it happens, and just nobody has any idea what to do.
Yeah,
it reminds me a lot of Succession, or even a Game of Thrones, but especially Succession. It's the cronies. They don't. Yeah, it's just comical, and that power struggle that really is the driving force of the movie. It mainly boils down to Steve Buscemi's character, Nikita Khrushchev, and Simon Russell Beale's character, Lavrenti Beria. So you've got these two characters and kind of the rest of them kind of orbiting in the other characters' spheres, if that makes sense. The official leader after the death is a guy named Georgy Malenkov, who is essentially a puppet, and that's so much comedy comes from him just taking himself so seriously.
Right.
That's something that's so funny in the movie, that when characters like Beria and Khrushchev are actually talking politics, Malenkov is worried about what his portrait looks like, or appearances and cosmetics and things like that. So I just think it's really interesting. One thing that I love about this movie, just one of those small little things, anytime a major character is introduced, it does a freeze frame on them where it shows their name at the bottom.
Yeah.
And the reason I love that so much is because these are characters that, at least in their own mind, to themselves, they would view themselves as having this huge, swaggering introduction. It's all charismatic and huge and grand. But these freeze frames are of the most awkward faces and poses.
Yeah.
And it just really it drags these people down to size.
Exactly. And I think it portrays their characters perfectly. How, like you said, they view themselves so highly, but they're all kind of bumbling idiots at least the way they're portrayed in this movie. And I loved the one that really got me, because they do a lot of these freeze frames at the beginning. The one that really got me was, it was like halfway through the movie when this military leader is introduced. They do another one for him after there hasn't been one for like an hour, and that one got me so so hard as he ran into the room.
That's the most memorable one in the movie. And I think for me, he's the standout character. That's Jason Isaacs as Zukov or Zukev. I can't remember which. But he's just like, that's an interesting case, because all the characters in this movie are bad people.
Yes.
We are not supposed to root for any of them. But like Jason Isaacs, he just has so much charisma.
Yeah.
And so many like hilarious one-liners throughout the movie that I kind of couldn't help but like his character.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that you mentioned was how they're all bad people, and we're not supposed to like them. And I will say that that's something that I think could have been portrayed a little bit better, in the sense that there's a very clear protagonist and antagonist in Steve Buscemi's character, and the very clear remind me of his name again, Barry. Exactly. Yeah,
and I think like that. This isn't supposed to be a movie of a protagonist and an antagonist. It's supposed to be a bunch of antagonists kind of going together. And that leads nicely into really the only major criticisms I have with this movie is just some of the characters kind of being one-dimensional. And I think the prime example of that is Beria. Like, he's just so despicably evil with no redeeming quality in the slightest. Like, they make him as hateable as possible. And like, well, yeah, he's an awful person. Like, that's very much warranted. I feel like it creates that protagonist and antagonist dynamic, because even if Buscemi's character isn't a good guy, he seems like it in comparison to how awful Barry is.
Especially when he gets screwed over so many times in this movie that you are almost inclined to feel bad for him in a sense when you really shouldn't.
So that like leads into, so there's Beria obviously, and then the other character I kind of have an issue with is Stalin's son Vasily, and it's kind of conflicting because on one hand he's hilarious. He's like a drunken buffoon running around trying to grab people's guns, just all sorts of shenanigans.
I love the struggle scene where he's struggling to get this guard's gun and nobody's like stopping him because they just know he's not going to do anything.
30 seconds of just standing there waiting for it to end. And well, like, I love all of those moments and they're hilarious. I feel like he's almost too outlandish at times to where like I don't feel like the comedy ever detracts from the more serious story like underlying it all.
Yeah.
But this is the one occasion where I feel like it kind of does. And I don't know if I can really back that up as much as I'd like to, but that was just the one time where I thought it was a little too excessive. Maybe.
Yeah, I get that. And I mean, all the characters are portrayed as very cartoonish at times, and I think he's definitely the most cartoonish, where it's like, how is this, it kind of reminds you that you're watching a very, heavily satiricized version. I don't know if that's a word. But that is one thing that I think the movie does well otherwise, though, is that they kind of never pull punches with the time period and the awful things that happen in this time period. And I love kind of the juxtaposition sometimes of the absolute chaos happening in the city of Moscow and all these high-ups just so unfazed by it and like,
Yeah, they're sitting there laughing, watching cowboy movies while like the city is like suffering very badly. And then I think like they also do a good job illustrating just, we've kind of already talked about this, but the terror that's present in that time period. Because one little thing that I'm thinking of is after Stalin dies, there's two guards outside his room, just standing guard, and they hear like the thud of Stalin falling to the ground. But they're so terrified of like going in there and nothing being wrong that they just stand outside.
Yeah, an entire day passes, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and like he probably would have survived if not for the terror that he himself cultivated in other people.
Right.
So I think that's a really interesting tidbit. And then among the smaller elements of the movie, I think one of the standouts is this is an English and American cast. It's Russian, Soviet Union characters, but they're not speaking in Russian accents. They're speaking their native English and American dialects, and I think that creates a nice separation between the characters, because maybe being outsiders looking in on that time and place, we can kind of group all of these people under an umbrella of just like being this, that they're all part of the Soviet Union or whatnot, but with all these different dialects, it's just it adds such a like a flavor to it that I can't really describe, but it's just very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that also kind of bleeds through with the way the movie's shot. I feel like it's shot very modern, if that makes sense. Like it does a lot of like the kind of shaky cam, like just and like kind of the panning and stuff like that. It's very clearly not, even though it's portraying a very specific time period, I loved how it didn't kind of go too hard on that, and the way it modernized it in the way it's produced.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like,
it's not trying too hard to be that time period.
And yeah, so I think, I think the main kind of, not thematic driving point of this movie, but the main analytic point for us to talk about is just the way that it balances like the
comedy and the drama.
The drama.
Yeah.
And it requires such like a fine taste. Like if you're doing it in bad taste, it's just gonna come across as offensive and awful.
Sure.
Like I almost like, maybe this isn't the best comparison, but almost something like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Like
right.
Those characters can get away with doing and saying such awful things because the comedy is just done so respectfully and in good taste. And I think in good faith rather.
Right.
And I feel like that's the case with the Death of Stalin. It never feels offensive. It doesn't feel like it's stepping on the toes of anything, but it's also not downplaying the atrocity. I feel like it's another spin on the social commentary that you could have.
Exactly. And I think it almost paints a better picture as if you were watching some like hyper realistic, like really depressing movie about the time period. I think the way they do it is very good because, like I said earlier, they don't really pull any punches in showing you everything that's happened, and I think that makes it feel a lot more tasteful than if they were like, oh, this is going to be a satirical comedy about the Soviet Union, but we're going to just cut out all of the really bad, like not funny stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that would have made it feel a little more like, I don't know, a little more, less tasteful.
Yeah.
I'll say. Can
we agree? This just came to me. I think we might have touched on it before, but this movie, to me, it's almost like the Jojo Rabbit of the Soviet Union.
It's a very similar
taking that
type
tragedy and putting on the kind of comedic spin. So I want to circle a little bit back around to the one-dimensionality of specifically Beria.
Okay.
Because I feel like it kind of takes away from the narrative drive of the movie in a sense, because obviously the main focus is the power struggle between Khrushchev and Beria and who's going to come out on top and rule the Soviet Union. But with Beria just being so despicably awful, like there's no reason for us not to expect everybody else just siding with Khrushchev to take out Beria. And in the end, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know. I would have... Let's put it this way. This isn't necessarily a movie that I'm watching for the story as much as it is for the the performances and just kind of the dialogue and the moment-to-moment banter. Like, that's what sells it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's honestly my biggest complaint with this movie is I kind of felt it lulling a few times where the comedy is definitely there throughout the entire movie, but there are definitely a few points where it's like the comedy doesn't really take a backseat, but you're just kind of like nothing's really happening. It's like a lot of like quick scenes of people talking and trying to move the plot forward, but it's like...
And that's a really good point.
There's no depth in the plot, you know?
Now that I think about it, because at those moments in the movie where the comedy is toned back, it's not as, it's not as laugh out loud funny or anything, but I don't think the drama is ever too amplified to kind of counteract that.
Exactly.
So we're kind of left with a few times in the movie where, when it slows down, like you said, where it's not super hilarious, but it's also not giving us much drama to balance that.
Yeah, I was never really like, oh, what's going to happen next? I was very much just kind of along for the ride, and everything just kind of goes. You know what I mean? There's no like rising, there's no tension building up, there's no big release or anything at the end. It just kind of goes.
So it's far from a perfect movie. Granted, none of the movies we've talked about have been perfect, but I still think this is just so unique. Yeah. And just the way it tackles this subject, and I like the performances, the cast is so just amazing to me, and that's what's made it so rewatchable for me.
It's definitely the performances. It's very much like an ensemble type comedy. I think I said this to you earlier. It reminds me a lot of a Wes Anderson movie in the sense that it's like all these goofy characters portrayed by very funny actors kind of coming together, and just nobody feels like worse than anybody else. You know what I mean? There's no like duds in the cast or anybody that's like blows everyone out of the water. I feel like everybody just has such a strong performance in this one.
Exactly. So I guess my final point, just the ending shot of the movie I thought was tremendous. So it's after Khrushchev is he's defeated Beria. He's taken charge. He's the new leader. The last shot of the movie, it's Khrushchev sitting in a theater, just watching like a play or a symphony or something like that. And he's just sitting there, enjoying himself, having a good time. And the camera kind of pans up to somebody sitting about 10 rows back or something. And he's eyeing Khrushchev. Yeah. And you find out through like a little caption that that's the guy who will take over from Khrushchev in a little bit. And I think it just illustrates that cycle of power that a lot of this movie revolves around. And granted, I don't think it's explored quite as fully as it maybe could have been, but that ending note, at least, is a very, I guess, good reminder, stark reminder of the dynamics of power that we're working with.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I appreciated how the movie never kind of it never really bit off more than it could chew, in the sense that the way the movie starts is with captions telling you where we are and what's happening. And the movie ends with captions telling you how it ended and like what's happening next. And that's kind of a little jarring at first, but it's nice because it's like, that's all we really needed. You know what I mean?
And I don't feel like it really is just like an exposition dump or anything.
No, not at all.
With the complexities of this subject matter, I feel like it's warranted. That allows them to spend a bit more time on the comedy and like the dynamics between the characters.
Yeah.
So I don't really have anything else to say about this movie. I think we had a really solid discussion here. And guys, stay tuned for the series finale of Citizen Kino, which we're going to be recording here pretty soon. We've got a very special episode with a very special guest. So this has been another episode of Citizen Kino. I'm Max Heresy. This is my brother Sam. Thank you all for watching, and with ZTV's Goofing Off, see you later.
Take care, guys.